And I realized, as I tried to list all of the stories that I have told in the book, that there are more stories than I can really talk about in this time, and I need to reduce it down to 4 stories, and that's what I've done. And I think these 4 stories really do, in a way, tell the beginning, middle, and end of the overall story of the manufacturing crisis, its origins, and its not its denouement, because that remains to be seen, but the present situation regarding the issue of the Iran nuclear program. And so the first of these 4 stories that I want to briefly describe to you in the book, from the book, is how the United States government first intervened in a very forceful, albeit diplomatic, political way, to try to strangle the Iranian nuclear program almost in its cradle. That is to say, the Iranian nuclear program under the Islamic Republic after the 1979 revolution. And what is, I think, almost unknown about the history of the Iranian nuclear program and the interactions between U.S. policy and that program is that the initial Iranian intent under the Islamic Republic was to actually almost dismantle the Shah's nuclear program. And that was because most of the high-ranking officials or mullahs of the new regime believed that the nuclear program was what they thought of as the Shah's toy, and that it related to his very incestuous relationship with U.S. imperialism. And so the overall attitude towards the nuclear program was really quite negative in the initial assessment of the new regime. But what happened was that after a couple of winters in which the population, particularly of the cities, ran short on energy, there was a shift in thinking on the part of the leadership, political leadership in Tehran, and they decided, well, maybe we'd better have a nuclear program after all. But it was still a program that was very much scaled down from what the Shah had in mind. And indeed, it consisted essentially of having a single nuclear power plant at Bushehr, which they had already invested a very large sum of money in over the years, completing that, and essentially having the Europeans, in this case a French-based company, essentially provide the nuclear fuel for their power plant. That meant that the Iranian regime did not expect to have the capability to enrich uranium itself. That is, there would be no national capacity for uranium enrichment. And that was the policy that was adopted in 1981, it was 1982, 1983, 1984. They were still following that policy. They invited the IAEA in on the premise of that policy to help them in their nuclear program. And the IAEA, of course, very pleased to do so, sent a mission and had agreed on a program of assistance, technical assistance to Iran with regard to its scaled down nuclear program. And then the Americans found out about it, the Reagan administration, 1983, late 1983, found out about this plan that the IAEA had been approved by the technical level of the agency, and immediately put its foot down and said, no, you may not, they allowed them to do some of the things, but they would not allow them to do something as sensitive as learning how to convert uranium so that it could be enriched. They would not allow them to do fuel, the actual fuel rods, to learn how to do fuel rods for Bushehr. or for the Tehran research reactor. And this was the beginning of a decided policy by the Reagan administration of not allowing Iran to have a nuclear program. It was very clear that that was the intention. And the reason, of course, was a fundamental anti-Iran policy on the part of the Reagan administration, which at that point involved supporting Iraq in its offensive as well as defensive war against Iran. And in 1983-84, there's no question that played the primary role in the thinking of the administration with regard to that policy. It was a stupid policy. It was also a policy that was imperialist. It deprived or attempted to deprive Iran of its right under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, very clearly inscribed in the treaty, to have a peaceful nuclear program, to have access to the technology internationally, and to get the cooperation of other members of the NPT, including, of course, the United States. So it was a direct, dramatic, massive violation of the NPT by the United States. But more importantly, in terms of the longer-term consequences, what this did was to present Iran with the choice of either giving up their nuclear program entirely or deciding to have some enrichment capability, a national enrichment capability for Iran. And of course, they decided it should be no surprise that they decided on the latter course. Then, of course, later on, the United States cited the Iranian effort to have a national capacity for uranium enrichment as evidence that this was a country that was after nuclear weapons. And that brings me then to the second story, which is the story of how the US intelligence community began to get off on the wrong foot with regard to Iran very early on, in the early 1990s, and by its assessment of a set of telexes that were intercepted by Western intelligence. We still don't know who initially intercepted them, but there was cooperation among Israel, Germany, UK, and the United States. We know that. So it was one of those four, or perhaps even more than one, which was doing it. They intercepted these telexes from Sharif University, which were in search of technology that was, in some cases, a few cases, dual-use technology. Most of it was not even dual-use technology. It had nothing to do with a nuclear program, even in the wildest imagination of the intelligence assessor, analysts. But they picked out a few of these telexes that had to do with ring magnets, fluorine, high vacuum equipment, and a balancing machine, and said, oh, this looks very suspicious. And then they saw that there was a telex number that belonged to an outfit that had contracts, military contracts, with the defense ministry of Iran. And therefore, they put these two and two together, and they got 10, essentially, or maybe 20 would be closer to the truth. And they decided that this meant that probably Iran was trying to, that the Iranian military was trying to have its own nuclear program, and therefore that the Iranian government was essentially carrying out a covert program of nuclear weapons development. And that assessment then became the dominant assessment for the next 15 years. The reason we know that is that as of 2004, Ali Heinonen, then the head of Safeguards Department of the IAEA, tells us in more recent writing that they were tipped off by somebody about some telexes, he didn't say telexes, but procurement information that was suspicious and that they should investigate. And of course they did investigate it. And what then happened was the truth finally came out. They learned that in every case that they had queried the Iranians about all of those that I've mentioned, it turned out that those were procurement efforts that were requested by various faculties of the Sharif University for student, for teaching and for student and faculty research. And they had amassed very convincing documentary